This is Health Unabashed, broadcasting live on Healthcare Now Radio. Health Unabashed is where healthcare meets innovation, insight, and impact. We engage top industry minds to explore the future of health and wellness, from visionary thinking to sustainable models, policy reform to frontline delivery, and ultimately the real-world impact on public health. I'm Greg Masters, co-host and executive producer, alongside my partner in conversation, the ever-curious digital health aficionado, author, editor, global thought leader, and industry steward, Gil Bashe. Together, we bring you the people, ideas, and movements reshaping healthcare, not with hype, but with purpose and persistence. Now, with no further delay, Gil, the mic is yours.
Greg, thank you very, very much for the gracious introduction. And we're here live at BIO 2026. This has been a fabulous meeting. And one of the great aspects of being here at BIO is it's an assembly for thousands and thousands of people who are at the cutting edge of therapeutics, of the future of care. We're looking at genomics. We're looking at countries who are investing billions of dollars in terms of attracting talent to their shores. I've just written an article on Abu Dhabi, how much money they're spending, the deals they're signing with California. And also you find an ability to connect with people and companies like Vaxart Therapeutics that are at the very cutting edge of changing the future of care. So we have two senior executives with us. We have Stephen Lowe and we have Sean Tucker, the CEO and Chief Medical Officer of the enterprise. They have been presenting at various sessions here. One of the sessions they presented at, I believe it was yesterday,
Yes.
was at the storytelling exhibit and speaker area, right on the exhibit floor. Now, Vaxart Inc. is doing some very, very exciting things. They're actually looking at the future of vaccination. And they're changing our perception of vaccination from the sense of, as we all remember recently, particularly during the COVID era, going there and rolling up your sleeve, getting a inoculation, vaccination, immunization, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, we see the pharmacist or family doctor take the needle and put it into a red hazard, sort of like waste box to be discarded safely, ideally. And then we find out sometimes that those syringes wash up on shores later on and become a biohazard. The question is, what happens if we eliminated syringes altogether? What happens if the therapy that we receive by way of a syringe, we could receive in way of a tablet? And that's what we're going to talk about. That's what Vaxart is in the cutting edge of exploring right now. Right now, they're looking at actually two viruses, but I'm sure that that's just the beginning of the journey that the company is taking and looking at other applications for the technology. So, Stephen and Sean, thank you so much for joining us here. And I just wanted to ask you, first of all, what was the reaction to people when you finished your session at the storytelling exhibit?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Gil. It's just an honor to be on this show and talk about the great technology. Sean Tucker, our founder, he's been working on this for a long time. And I'm sure he enjoyed the fact that a lot of folks came up to us after that session and were asking questions about the science. They were also commending us for continuing to fight the fight with working on vaccines. And more importantly, that we're thinking about innovation and thinking about the future, as you mentioned, on how vaccines should be delivered, right? So being delivered in a pill format, like you said, where one just takes it, and as well, not having to get in the car, walk over to the pharmacy, wait in those long lines, and then finally you get to the right person who will then send you to a little room to wait for them again so that you can get your injection. And that's part of the vision of what Sean had when he started the company. And I'm delighted to be working with him because I love the part about the distribution piece of it too, right? The future could involve, as we see, drones from a pharmacy or Amazon pharmacy, and
that's a drop.
Exactly, right? Innovation plus innovation. But yeah, I'll let Sean talk about.
I mean, you had the genesis of this, the idea, and obviously I've attended a lot of sessions here at BIO where people are talking about the swirl and misunderstanding around vaccination. Obviously, with your idea, with yours founding the company, the concept of bringing this to a tablet, to a pill, almost demystifies the whole mystique. We're used to taking pills. It's part of our daily life. You're integrating now prevention, disease prevention. One of the things people talked about, we don't have to get into any politics here, really want to talk about Vaxart, is how do we get back on track on a preventive mode or the reduction of disease risk mode in our country? And obviously, one way to do that is to make the application of vaccination just easier.
I think you raised a really good point. And again, the whole point of Vaxart was to try to make the application, as you point out, a lot simpler. I mean, from my own personal experience, I get busy and I don't have the time. It feels like to go up the hill, to go wait in line to get my shot. But I figured if something could come to my house, I would take the vaccine every year for flu, for example, because that's a seasonal product. And the question, of course, was how do you build something that is simple and is easy to use, that you don't need an instruction manual to figure out how to deal with it? And of course, tablets came to mind because we all take tablets every day, even if you just take an Advil or something. Everybody does this, and it's not much learning involved. So it took some time to figure out how to do this, but the whole impetus was to say, let's make something that's easier to use. People will adopt it. And if you get more people vaccinated, your public health in general will be better because you've made a bigger dent in, the community health and protection. So it means the viruses aren't going to go as far.
I mean, absolutely. Look, what good is breakthrough therapy if people don't have access to it or don't use it? I mean, then it's worthless to begin with.
Right.
But I wanted to go back to the very idea because vaccination, even though right now we have a lot of swirl, there's a lot of misunderstanding of this, that eventually will clear itself. And to some extent, there is misunderstanding and there are myths.
Yes.
Of a sudden that have appeared in the last, we'll say in the last 3 years or 4 years or so. But put that aside for a second. Obviously, the possibility of reducing risk in our senior population, young population, in our immune compromised population, I mean, this would be a real breakthrough modality. So once you came up with the idea as founder, what was the initial reaction when you went out with a concept and said, we're going to need some initial funding for this idea to put together a team, bring the right people together, be able to do some initial phase 1 testing, all this of the modality? Did people say, hey, Sean, that's a really great idea, bye? Or did they say, it's a great idea, you're not reinventing, in essence, the actual substance, you're reinventing how that substance will be delivered?
I think the way it came across is that if you could do this, this would be the holy grail, a oral vaccine platform that could be used for many, many different indications, and of course, the public health aspect. But the funny thing is that the most of the people that would look at this says, it's been tried, it's not going to work. So there was a lot of skepticism. And again, my crowd of scientists, we're all skeptics because that's what we're trained. So it took us a while to get to the point where we could actually get the preliminary data to convince people that are funders that we've solved it. So it was like, do a little bit of work, show that it works, do a little bit more, show that it works, pay more money. So it took a long path because there was a lot of skepticism. People had tried similar things in the past and it had just failed. And so, but I was always early on. I talked to some pretty smart people at Stanford.
Your colleague, it's Steve Lowe, right?
Well, I didn't know Steve back then.
Did you meet through Vaxart? Sort of
We met at Vaxart.
Yeah.
So, but they found smart people that said, hey, if you could do this, it's the holy grail. And then, of course, it just took a long time to get a little bit of data to convince the skeptics just
step
to
by
keep funding.
step.
And so it was very slow.
I write a lot about reducing friction.
Yeah.
I think of what you're doing, and I'm saying to myself, access to therapy in terms of having to get yourself out and go, make the appointment and remember and get check off the sort of the anxiety around needles gone, right? The ability not to deal with refrigeration and cold storage gone. The idea of being able to distribute with ease sort of reduce the frustration. And there's so many steps that this would take. You would expect that certainly the public health community must be sort of standing on the sidelines like you're marathon runners, kind of like cheering you on and applauding. Do you ever get that feeling from the public health community?
It's interesting.
Go, go, go. Like, getting Vaxart Go T-shirts.
No, it's funny. I was just talking to a clinician that works in rural communities in Australia yesterday, and she basically said, wait a minute, this is what you have. You have this sort of platform that's room temperature stable, as well as being something you can easily swallow in terms of getting it across. This would make a huge difference in my community because it would be so much easier to, one, get people in, and two, the fact that she's trying to get out to the rural communities around. It was just very difficult with the current ways of doing.
Well, I also think, look, you don't have to answer this. You could say, I don't know. But in many cases, we've had therapies. It could be like insulin, growth hormone, where suddenly the therapy was no longer the patent protected aspect of the therapy. It was actually the delivery system that became so the injector suddenly became married to the therapy and extended the life of the therapy. And so you had very successful therapeutic brands that maintained their patent protection, not because of the original hormone, the original insulin, but the modality of delivery. Will that be a possibility here? In other words, if a major vaccine company, I won't mention names, were to say, hey, let's partner, try to use our stuff in this thing, we'll fund the program with you, you try to make it work. Would that would obviously be extended for them.
And that's actually one of the many reasons why Sean and I are pretty busy at this bio, right? What you're referring to, Gil, is what companies call life cycle extension.
Yes.
Right. And so
this is very, very valid because it's a game changer in the delivery of the therapy.
Especially if you're in a competitive environment, right? So if and I know the growth hormone market fairly well, having worked in that a long time ago, right? You had essentially the component being similar, but you differentiated based on the delivery device, right? Or there's 6 or 7 competitors, so how do you separate yourself? And if you have a multi-billion-dollar franchise, and vaccines are still multi-billion-dollar products, and you want to maintain that stronghold and be the market leader, looking at life cycle extension and looking at novel ways to deliver, as what we have here at Vaxart, makes a lot of sense. And what's great about what Sean's invented is it's, in a sense, a cassette, right? You can take an antigen, whatever antigen you may be working on, and see if it works on our platform. And if it works, there goes the next one. And so that's also a modular way of how the platform has been designed.
Just tuning in, you're right on time for Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio. Stay tuned. Plenty of thought-provoking insights yet to share.
Now, you've started with 2 vaccines right now.
Well, we've been in the clinic on 3 different indications at a very substantial amount. We've been flu data. We did a lot of flu work before the pandemic, and then we did COVID-19 after the pandemic, and we've been working on that one pretty diligently since. And then we have a norovirus vaccine,
which would be unique. That would be
the first in the vaccine, if it's approved, as we go forward and get all the data. That would be the first norovirus vaccine available. And again, from our standpoint, I think one of the things that I think people don't appreciate is that all these pathogens usually come through a wet surface. They come through your nose, your mouth. You swallow it by accident, and you get all this, and it affects your intestine, or for example, with norovirus. And I think what's not really well known in the field is that when you inject a vaccine, you get antibodies in the blood, but you don't get these ones at the wet surfaces. And what we found with our technology is when you swallow our vaccine, it goes and does its work. It activates B cells in the mucosal sites. And so we get antibodies in the mouth, the nose, the intestine, and those are much more protective against these things that actually invade through the wet surface. So again, we talked all about getting this vaccine out and how this mode is easy, but on the technical side of things, there may be some significant advantages in terms of having better vaccines, just because the fact that we make these mucosal responses.
Yeah, I don't want to get into differentiators that could be sort of like expressing indications of use or labeling. I don't want to put you in that sort of situation, heaven forbid. But the advantages I could see for geography, for age groups, all that. Now, could you describe how large a tablet that might have to be in terms of, is it sort of Sudafed size or Mucinex DM size? Is it bigger? Is it small?
It's the size of a small adult tablet. So it's about 250 milligrams.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And you can put multiple strains on each tablet if you want to do that, or you could keep them separate because taking 2 tablets is not anything more difficult than taking 1 tablet. Whereas if you had a flu vaccine or something else that was 2 shots, people wouldn't really appreciate taking multiple shots. It's hard enough to get them to take 1. Multiple shots is probably a no-go.
There's always been people who have had some sort of avoidance of needles. It's just an emotional, natural reaction. And I don't know if you're required to sort of test in terms of aversion to therapy, or obviously efficacy is going to be the holy grail.
Right.
Efficacy and safety. Safety and efficacy is the holy grail here.
Mm-hmm.
But do you also do any tests in terms of the response of the patient in the trial in terms of take this or needle? I imagine you have some sort of control groups that you might be working on.
I mean, we haven't, in our trials, we haven't never asked the question, are you afraid of taking a pill? There's definitely been people in our trials that are afraid of needles. So we've never really asked that question. I can tell you just anecdotally, we think that we find that people like to enroll in our trials because they say, oh, wait, it's a tablet vaccine? That sounds something great. I'd love to sign up. So we haven't had very many issues with people saying, oh, no, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just interested in, again, if this is information you can share or it's not the right moment to share, please just sort of say
Sure.
you're not able to
Sure.
share the information. I know with the COVID vaccines, for instance, particularly with the second shot, many people would exhibit side effects, zero dizziness. Or just curious, is it possible that because it's ingested, the severity of side effects might be reduced to the inoculation to the shot?
I can't give you a definitive question versus COVID versus our pill, but I can say that when we did a study that, again, this has been published in Lancet ID, where we compared our oral tablet vaccine to an injected Sanofi vaccine. And again, we have to blind these things. So when you take our vaccine pill, we give a saline injection. And with the Sanofi vaccine, you have to take a placebo tablet because otherwise you'd know, right?
Absolutely.
So then you ask the solicited symptoms. Do you feel any injection site pain? Do you feel this? Well, the Sanofi vaccine is well tolerated. Our vaccine is well tolerated. The Sanofi vaccine, there were slightly elevated people complaining about arm injection pain, which not surprising. For ours, it looked like solicited symptoms, what people reported, looked very similar to placebo. So that's the best study I can point to that says, yes, we do have a very benign safety profile. It looks similar to placebo. And yes, people that take an injected vaccine typically have a little bit more injection site pain. That's the clearest data I have.
Sure. And around the same time, the company also did a consumer survey and asked consumers if you had a choice between taking a vaccine with an injection versus taking it with a pill, what would you choose? Now, the interesting part was 4 out of 5 said they would take the pill. 1 out of 5, they would prefer the pill versus the 1 in 5 with the injection. And maybe those are just very traditionalist, whatever the case may be. I think we want to go for the 5 for 5, but still 4 out of 5
is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a clear preference. Well, look, 3 out of 5 would have been a clear preference, right? A majority is a majority when you have a cohort of enough people in the trial. But 4 out of 5 is basically a clear vote of, that's the direction we want to go. So you're starting with these 3, sort of like indications, possible indications. Where do you see this going? I mean, obviously, if you're successful here, what's the possible next step, application of the technology?
Well, there's a couple things that we're very excited about. I'm going to tell you one that's actually in our pipeline. One of the things we're looking at is an indication called therapeutic vaccine for HPV. And the idea is, of course, is that by giving our vaccine in a mucosal site, we're going to make T cells that are going to be able to go and clear precancerous lesions against HPV. And we think that would be, a fantastic way.
I know a major company that would probably be rushing to your doorstep. And interestingly enough, what I've heard in the data that I've read often is not so much skepticism about the HPV vaccine, but it's concern about the injection. You're dealing in many cases with teenagers still, that they're being encouraged to get the HPV vaccine. The HPV vaccine is a miracle vaccine in that it prevents, certainly in young women, cervical cancers, prevents other cancers. The ability to increase adherence and protection by a mere even 10% would be game changing for the population in terms of preventive care. I imagine that you'd be able to increase it potentially even more, but time will tell.
This
But any increase is life saving.
this we think is more of a therapy that people that either failed to have the vaccine to work or they didn't take the vaccine, this would be sort of batting cleanup. And so they would be able to treat people that have an HPV lesion and be able to deal with it.
And there are certain and there are certain parts of the world that the vaccination rate for HPV is lower. In fact, I would say in the US there may be lower rates in certain states.
That's correct.
And so as Sean's mentioning, here's another approach on the therapeutic side. Should someone not have taken a vaccine and seen some indicator that they may need the HPV therapeutic vaccine. So absolutely, right? So
Are you in the clinic at all for this yet, or still?
This has been de-risked completely from the standpoint of the preclinical, and essentially we're ready to get into the clinic. So it's still early stage.
So congratulations. This would be, all of the work you're doing would be a mega public health contribution to society. But this alone would be sort of game changing, globally. I look at certainly in Africa where there is concern about HIV vaccination. This would be incredible. Now we're also dealing with the world's youngest population there, which is obviously a risk population.
Well, I think what Sean could also tell you about, speaking of Africa, because I love what you just mentioned there, is we had conducted a very interesting study with support from the Gates Foundation in Africa. So, Sean, if you want to describe that.
So the idea was pretty simple. In a lot of places in the developing world, young infants, their immune systems in the intestine and other places don't function very well. And so it's really hard for them to take vaccines like the rotavirus vaccine because they just don't work very well. Again, part of it's nutrition, part of it's just infections. And so the idea was, let's do a study where we give our vaccine to lactating mothers and let the breast milk provide the protection against that infection.
Well, rotavirus in those countries is a deadly virus, of course. They don't have the hospitalization, they don't have the fluids to give infants that are unfortunately having these severe bouts of diarrhea. I mean, HPV, rotavirus,
norovirus. Yes.
I was just going to say, I don't say this flippantly, but you're on your way to a Nobel Prize if it's, but for good reason also. I mean, this is really taking vaccine to its greatest potential. Aside from getting the vaccine in the shower, I don't see an easier route.
That's clever. Yeah.
I don't see an easier route in making that. So first of all, I've got to thank you for joining us on the show. I mean, you're leaving tomorrow. You're leaving probably San Diego, going home and getting back to work. What's sort of the day after tomorrow look like for you?
Well, the day after tomorrow, once again, is staying on our mission, right? Sean's got a really great research team, and we're always looking at other opportunities. So that's number one. Number two is continued work on our current vaccines, getting it to the next stage, right? As Sean mentioned, we're currently in a phase 2B study with our COVID vaccine, and we're expecting to have some data very soon. So as that data comes out, we'll be able to then publish that or announce that. And hopefully that will bring more attention to all the great things that we're working on. So
I hope so. I was just going to say that, on one hand, companies that were involved in COVID sort of bypassed the traditional route of peer review publication. They went right to announcement, likely because of the public concern. Give us a solution. It sounds like you've been more judicious in terms of, making sure you have peer review data to back up everything that you're doing and looking at publication, looking at presentation, at least at a peer review setting. So I'm very, very excited about this. Obviously, this is I do expect you to see you presenting, whether it's, UN General Assembly Week or World Health Organization or Gavi and all these organizations that will look to partner. So we have to, on the behalf of society, wish you our very best for success. Obviously, you're potential superheroes in disease prevention. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I'd love to have Vaxart back on the program, actually, when the data are ready, and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what this means for that indication, but also for the future. Thank you so much. No, Steve and Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, our pleasure.
And that, dear listeners, wraps another thought-provoking conversation here on Health Unabashed. A heartfelt thank you to our global audience for joining us and to our guests. Health Unabashed streams live on Healthcare Now Radio Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 2:30 a.m. Eastern. That's 7:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. Pacific. Want to stay connected? Follow Gil at Gil_Bash, and that's Bashe, and me, Greg Masters, MPH, on Twitter, and that's Greg with 2 G's. Tag your insights and feedback using the hashtag HealthUnabashed. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep raising your voice with no apologies.